Warmaschine presents main German bolt-action rifle Karabiner 98K. When a historian looks at a Karabiner 98K, they aren't just seeing a weapon, they are seeing the final, polished expression of a 19th century idea, struggling to survive in a 20th century war. The popular narrative is simple: it was the reliable, accurate German Mauser. And that's true. But that surface-level admiration misses the deeper, more uncomfortable reality. The 98K story isn't really about its technical merits. It's about the doctrine that chained itself to it. The Wehrmacht that invaded Poland in 1939 was, in its infantry corps, equipped with a weapon conceptually identical to the one her father carried at Verdun. While the United States was fielding the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic that gave the average rifleman unprecedented firepower, Germany doubled down on the bolt action. This wasn't a failure of engineering, but a catastrophic failure of foresight, a belief that the machine gun and the bolt-action rifle were a sufficient combined arms formula. The 98K, for all its quality, became the anchor that held the German infantryman to a past era of warfare, forcing him to survive through training and guile rather than firepower. To understand the 98K is to understand the difference between a superior rifle and a superior weapon system. The rifle was a product of consolidation, not revolution. To call the Kar 98K a new design is, well, a bit misleading. It was the result of a long pragmatic evolution aimed at standardizing and shortening existing arms. In the aftermath of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles restricted German weapons development, but the military circumvented this through alliances with foreign firms like Steyr in Austria and FN in Belgium. This is where the standard model was born in the 1920s, a commercial export rifle that was in essence a shorter Gewehr 98. When Hitler renounced the treaty, the Heereswaffenamt simply took that blueprint, added a few features like a turned-down bolt handle and a slightly different stock, and adopted it as the Karabiner 98K in 1935. The goal was a shorter, more manageable rifle for the modern, motorized infantryman. At 43.7 inches, it was a carbine in name only by today's standards, but compared to the 49-inch Gewehr 98, it was a significant step forward in maneuverability. The genius was in its controlled feed action, a system so robust and safe that it remains the benchmark for dangerous game rifles today. The bolt had two massive locking lugs, and the extractor gripped the cartridge case from the moment it left the magazine, ensuring positive feeding even if the rifle was tilted or dirty. It was built to a standard, not just to a price. The shift from walnut to laminate tells the story of the war itself. Collectors obsess over the markings and manufacturer codes, by F. SWP, but the most telling detail is in the wood. Early 98Ks featured solid walnut stocks, a beautiful and strong hardwood. But walnut has a military purpose beyond aesthetics. It absorbs recoil and resists impact. As the war progressed and Germany's borders shrank, access to these materials was cut off. By 1937, Mauser was already experimenting with laminated stocks made from thin sheets of beechwood glued together under pressure. This wasn't a sign of defeat, it was a sign of industrial adaptability. The laminated stocks were actually denser, stronger, and more resistant to warping than their solid wood predecessors. They could be made from younger, faster-growing trees. It's a lesson in survival: when the supply chain is severed, you don't give up, you innovate with what you have. This same principle applied to metal finishing. Early rifles were finished in a high-quality rust bluing, a time-consuming process. Later guns, especially by 1944, were finished in a phosphated parkerized finish, which was rougher but more corrosion-resistant, and crucially, faster to apply. The 98K was a sniper's tool, but the role was really, an afterthought. While the standard infantryman made do with iron sights graduated out to an optimistic 2,000 meters, a select few 98Ks were built to a much higher standard. The German military didn't actually have a standing sniper corps at the outbreak of the war. Scoped 98Ks were initially acquired in small numbers, and honestly, it was only during the static campaigns in the East that the need became, well, truly dire. Armorers would hand-select rifles from the production line that happened to have particularly tight tolerances and accurate barrels. These were then fitted with low magnification scopes, usually 4 times or 6 times, mounted not over the bore, but offset to the side so that stripper clips could still be used to reload the magazine. This was a practical solution, but it required a sniper to relearn his cheek weld and account for the offset at different ranges. The true lesson here is in the nature of the threat. A 98K in the hands of a trained sniper became a weapon of terror and delay, capable of holding up entire battalions. The Soviet doctrine of sniper hunts was born directly from the brutality of facing these German marksmen, a tactic that influenced counter-insurgency and urban warfare doctrine for decades after. By 1944, the Kriegsmodell revealed a regime in collapse. If the early war 98K represents German industrial strength, the Kriegsmodell or war model of 1944 represents its desperation. Production was simplified to the bone. The bayonet lug was often omitted, the stock was made from rougher laminates, and the butt plate was changed from a machined piece to a stamped, cupped piece of sheet metal. The cleaning kit was no longer issued with the rifle. The metalwork was rough, with visible tool marks. These were not rifles that the meticulous craftsmen of Oberndorf would have stamped their names on. Yet, they functioned. Over 14 million Kar 98Ks were produced, and the peak production year was 1944, not 1940. This is a critical point about survival. Quality is a luxury, but quantity is a necessity. The later rifles were ugly, but they put steel into the hands of the Volkssturm and the last-ditch defenders. They worked because the fundamental design was so over-engineered that it could withstand the degradation of its manufacturing process. The legacy is not in the hands that held it, but in the hands that took it. The story of the Kar 98K does not end in a Berlin bunker in 1945. It begins anew. The Soviets captured millions of them and stored them for decades, eventually distributing them as military aid to proxy armies across the globe. The 98K has been used in every major conflict since World War II by the Israelis in 1948, by the North Vietnamese against American forces, and by insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan. It appears in conflict zones today, not because it's the best tool for the job, but because it is an inexhaustible tool. It is a testament to a design that was so simple, so robust, that it transcends the political entity that created it. It is a weapon that requires no supply chain, no complex logistics. A man with a box of ammunition and a Kar 98K is a fighter. That is its final, and perhaps most significant lesson. In a world of complex systems and technological advantage, sometimes survival comes down to the simplest, most reliable tool you can find. The Karabiner 98K is more than a rifle. It is a physical history of the 20th century, written in machined steel and laminated wood. It teaches us that winning a war isn't just about having the best technology, it's about anticipating the nature of the next fight. The Germans failed to do that, and their infantry paid the price. But the rifle they built was so fundamentally sound that it outlived their 1,000-year Reich by generations. If you value this kind of in-depth historical analysis, looking past the myths to understand the machinery and the men who used it, make sure you subscribe to War Machina. Hit that subscribe button and share this video with anyone who understands that history is not just about dates and names, but about the tools we build and the choices we make. I'm your name. Thanks for watching.